Please, once again, dear colleagues, can you take your seat? We now come to the ceremony to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Six million Jews died during the Holocaust. 6 million faces, 6 million names, 6 million human fates. Together with millions of other Europeans who were killed because of their ethnic origin, disability, political views, or sexual orientation, they were the victims of the worst crime in the history of mankind. A crime conceived, planned, and carried out here in Europe less than a lifetime ago. To mark today's occasion, I have chosen to speak of 2 out of these millions of victims. I do not know their names. I do not know exactly where they lived. What I have is a blurred black and white photo of the last moments of their lives, which I have seen in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. I believe that the tragic and horrifying story of the 2 persons in this photo, even it represents only one tear in the sea of sorrow, is emblematic of what has happened and deserves to be told. On the photo, taken during the mass murder operations of the Einsatzgruppen in one of the Baltic states, a woman is holding a child, 4, perhaps 5 years old. We cannot see if it is a boy or a girl, because it's burying its head in the shoulders of his mother, seeking protection from the horror that surrounds it. The mother's head is tilted gently downwards, as if she whispering in the child's ear a few last desperate words of consolation. But there is nothing she can do. In the last instinctive and futile attempt to protect her child, the mother has turned her back to a soldier, standing a few steps behind her, with his rifle raised and ready to shoot. There is a young child in its mother's embrace. It is paralyzed with fear, yet still believing that its mother will not let anything bad happen to it. Because this is what parents are supposed to do, aren't it? Can we even try to imagine the desperation of a mother unable to protect her child from such a fate? The woman in the photo died as a mother even before she was killed as a human being. Finally, there is the executioner. He seems composed and organized. His posture is perfect, straight out of a military manual. The right leg is half a step behind to give him better support. The butt of his rifle is placed securely against his right shoulder. He is taking aim calmly, as if he was at a shooting range and not about to murder 2 human beings. There is a total absence of emotion. The soldier in the photo is just carrying out his orders. This is the ultimate illustration of the horror of the Nazis' final solution. The mother and her child, and millions of their fellow victims died as a result of a crime which was conceived by politicians, meticulously planned by bureaucrats, and carried out by soldiers. They were murdered through protocol and procedure, with methods prescribed and quotas to be attained. This episode of the Shoah did not take place in Auschwitz, the liberation of which we are commemorating this week. But this is a geographic coincidence. I have chosen to tell the story of one mother and her child because I believe that we should remember the individual fates of those who died in such horrendous circumstances and not abandon them to statistical anonymity. The mass murder of 6 million Jews, but also of Poles, Russians, and other Slavic people, of Roma, homosexuals, disabled persons, and political opponents of the Nazi regime, is a crime of such horrifying proportions that it transcends the boundaries of time. It is and will be forever a burning wound on the collective conscience of humankind and a part of our yesterday, our today, and our tomorrow. We cannot and must not tolerate the revival of the ideology behind this crime. We must not accept that the horrors caused by the Nazi regime and the memory of the Shoah are banalized, questioned, denied, or even ridiculed. I wish I could have said that Europe is free of anti-Semitism, that it is free of hatred and intolerance and neglect for human life and dignity. But we all know that is not yet the case. A compatriot of mine, a young woman named Etty Hillesum from Amsterdam, wrote these words just over 60 years ago, and I quote, "If all this suffering does not help us to broaden our horizon, to attain a greater humanity by shedding all trifling and irrelevant issues, then it will all have been for nothing." Etty Hillesum was Jewish. She died in Auschwitz at the age of 29, 2 years before the Russian troops arrived and freed the survivors. The liberation brought an end to a crime, but not to its consequences. In the aftermath of war, Europe was devastated and traumatized. It took time before wounds started to heal and hope began to gain against despair. Our organization was created to nurture and protect that hope and to make it a reality for all the citizens of Europe. This is what we have done for the past 50 years, and this is what we shall continue to do, because we owe it to the mother and child in the photograph and to all the other victims of Nazism, because we are determined to honor Etty Hillesum's plea. I have the honor to welcome Professor Weiss, who is the chairman of the Yad Vashem Council in Israel. He has served his country for 35 years in a number of important political and academic positions. Professor Weiss was formerly Speaker of the Knesset, and many of us remember him as a member of the Knesset delegation to the Council of Europe. C'est également un honneur d'accueillir en cet hémicycle M. Jean Samuel, survivant d'Auschwitz, qui est alsacien, région durement éprouvée par les crimes nazis. Je le remercie très sincèrement d'avoir accepté notre invitation. J'accueille aussi les représentants des autorités locales et religieuses et les remercie de nous avoir rejoints pour cette commémoration. May I now give the floor to Professor Weiss.
Thank you. Distinguished President, distinguished parliamentarians, I would like to thank you so much for your speech. As I understand, it is the first, one of the first speeches as a president. The beginning is very moral. And I prepared a speech, but after your speech, I decided don't use my prepared speech and talk something from heart to heart, as it was done by the President of Europe Council. Maybe that such kind of talks from heart to heart will develop our solidarity as human beings, as Democrats. I am very proud to stand here. I remember my service as a member of the Israeli delegation. At what I'm going to say, I hope that I can say it in behalf of my colleagues in the Israeli delegations here. Member of the Parliament, Tomi Lapid, former Minister of Justice, a Holocaust survivor. Member of Parliament, Ran Cohen. Ran Cohen was born in Iraq. From many, many points of view, he is also a Holocaust survivor. Why? Because one of the terrible, cruel, satanic, diabolistic documents is the documents, a secret document after the Wannsee Conference. And we can find in this document a systematic plan of murdering, of realization of the final solution to kill all Jews in Europe, in the Middle East. Among them, more than 150,000 Jews from Iraq. And that is one of the unique points when we are talking about the Holocaust. The systematic realization of a satanic plan here in Europe, in your Europe, in our Europe. We were and are a part of the European civilization. The Jewish known history is a history of 3.5, maybe more, 1,000 years. Our calendar has 5,765 years. But talking about the known history, half maybe, or 30% of this history, we were here in Europe. We came to Europe. I would like to add and to emphasize and to say that the Jewish communities in Europe, we have it in Russia, in Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, France, Italy, Germany, Portugal, Spain, in England, in every place. I served as an Israeli ambassador to Poland the last 3 years. And I was born in Poland. I came from Poland. Today is a part of Ukraine. It's also so typical for Europe. It was Poland and later part of Ukraine. Europe was for the Jews one of the most important stations in the very long Jewish history. We create here in Europe, and we develop our philosophy, our religion, our history, poetry. We had here a Jewish life, in some places an autonomic Jewish life. But in the 19th century, in the 20th century, before the Nazi period, we were part of the European civilization, as it was in Germany. The philosopher Moshe Mendelssohn, the poet Heinrich Heine. After the Holocaust, we have dilemma and we have a problem with the German language, because the German language was not only the language of my father and my mother. I came from Borislav. It was a part of Count K, Kaiser und König, from the part of Austrian Empire. And the German language was the most prestigious language among Jews. And maybe the Jewish diaspora national language of the Ashkenazic Jews, Yiddish. The roots, the sources, they are German. And German language was the language of Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud and Gershon Scholem. And after the Holocaust, I personally, I cannot use some of the German words as links, rechts. When I'm hearing the word Achtung, it is for me something terrible, not only for me. We haven't nothing against the language, but I use the symbols of the satanic dark period, the outcomes, the psychological outcomes of this period. I was born in Borislav. We, under the Nazi occupation, we were hidden in a double wall and later in the cellar. In July 1944, we were liberated by the Red Army. We left the cellar, and the first Russian officer that we met, a major, he used a Jewish secret code between Jews, Amchu. Amchu, it means we belong to the same nation. It is also so symbolic. We Jews were the victims, and the Jewish major in the Red Army was the liberator. Because the Jewish nation, we take a part in the anti-Nazi war as soldiers, as officers. More than 800,000 Jews, they were involved in the war as fighters. In the Russian army, in the French army, in the Polish army, in the American army, in the British army, and. Mr. President, you talk about the faces, because when we are talking about 6 million, it is statistics. You can imagine in your imagination, I would like to describe, we're using an example, 6 million human beings holding hand to hand, arm to arm. will we create a line. This line will begin in Jerusalem, to Auschwitz, to Dachau, to Stutthof, to Majdanek, to Treblinka, to Sobibor, to Plaszów, to Babi Yar, to the killing sites near every forest in Europe, and back to Mauthausen, and back to Jerusalem, our eternal capital, our Jerusalem, the holy city of all of us. But our Jerusalem, our eternal capital city, it's a line of 6,000 kilometers of human beings, and the faces. Because every child had his name, Rochale und Reisale und Avremale und Shimale und Rivkale und Leale, thousands of Leales. I remember in the kindergarten, Borislav, my first love in my life, Bella, 5 years old. She was killed. And I remember it was in the third pogrom in Borislav. I will never forget her eyes, her hairs. And for me, my daughter Ifat, she was born in Israel, served in the Israeli army, because that is the situation. Because we decided never became murderers, but never became victims. And we need the army and the instrument of defense. And I hope that after all we will realize a peace atmosphere in the Middle East. And for me, my daughter Ifat and my granddaughter Shira is a metamorphose of my Bella. How many Bellas were killed here in Europe? The Nazi crime destroyed here in Europe. The Christian values, the democratic, liberal, the moral values of the French Revolution. It was a barbaric period. And the importance of this institution, of the new Europe, is that you and we, together, we tried renew the political democratic culture, the humanistic world, day after day, here in Europe. This Europe that is a lake of frozen Jewish blood, here. We together, we are busy with building a new and a better world. Together. After all, we have a new state. We renewed our old state. We are in the Middle East. But our European history is a part of our history. And our European past is a part of our present time and our future. I remember before 5 or 7 years when the German Foreign Minister, Joschka Fischer, declared that if he will have two alternatives, one, I'm talking about values, no more war. And another, no more Auschwitz. The primat, the first, is no more Auschwitz. No more Auschwitz. Never again. As you know, and as we know, some of the philosophers, as Immanuel Kant from Königsberg, Kaliningrad, and as a professor of political science, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, he was a professor of political science before he was elected as the President of the United States. They emphasized that only a democratic, political democratic cultural system, a democratic constitutional regimes, in such kind of regimes, the humanistic system is built in. And the fact that this institution today, with 46 or 47 European countries, is an institution of democratic parties. Maybe this is one of the impacts of the Holocaust of our political life, of our history. The fact that to rule with a tyrannic or despotic or totalitarian system is something that you must shame. It's one of the impacts of the Holocaust, I believe. That is the main power, because the Holocaust has an energy of theologic, religious energy. It's the day of European solidarity. Auschwitz, liberation of Auschwitz, became the day of European and human solidarity. I would like to finish my short sharing of my feelings and my minds and thoughts here in this institution, and to say something about our redemption. The two words, Holocaust and redemption. We will never forget the Holocaust. We can't forget. Maybe the three Holocaust survivors, we have a normal, so-called normal days, but the nights is not normal. Our dreams, the remembrance of our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and sisters and brothers. From many, many points of view, the murdering, we can feel a continuity of this murdering, because we were, before the World War II, 18 million Jews around the world, and today we are only 12 million. If not the Holocaust, maybe that we were, the Jewish nation, 30, 35 million. As a Polish nation, Spanish nation, with religious and non-religious, with left and right, with poor and rich, with intellectuals and non-intellectuals, as a normal nation. We stay on the same number. What is for us the redemption? The creating of a democratic constitutional state, the state of Israel. A creating of the power to defend Israel. A creation of cultural activity, academic activity, social activity, of renewing of our language, the old language, the Hebrew language, of creating a pluralistic society with a permanent struggle to achieve peace. Achieve Peace is for us well-being, moral being. After the Holocaust, for the majority of the people and citizen Jews in Israel, as in every place around the world, being comes before well-being. And after all, I hope that not in a far future we will achieve peace, and together with this society, with this new democratic civilization, we will struggle against anti-Semitism, against fascism, racism, against xenophobia, against the cruel, and against everything that is for us and for me, for the Holocaust survivor, that is connected and linkage with the evil of the past, the evil of the Nazi system, of fascism. And I believe that I believe in the success. We have no alternative. We must do it. Here, now, and permanently. Thank you.
Mr. Weiss, may I thank you very much for expressing your feelings in this assembly and giving your testimony here. You said the answer is never again, and the answer is the Council of Europe, and we are in the heart of the matter a peace project, and we hope that we can continue in the way we have done in the past in this assembly. May I thank you very much once again. May I now invite Mr. Jean Samuel, who survived Auschwitz and who is a resident of Strasbourg, to give his testimony to the Assembly. Monsieur Samuel, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, il y a 60 ans, à cette heure-ci, le 25 janvier 1945, je me trouvais quelque part en Tchécoslovaquie, dans un wagon découvert avec quelques survivants des 110 camarades déportés avec moi dans ce wagon. Il m'a semblé nécessaire et urgent de rappeler cet épisode peu connu de la Shoah, à la fois pour témoigner à tous ceux qui ne sont plus et pour transmettre à nos jeunes la mémoire, le devoir de mémoire. Je n'oublie pas ce que m'écrivait en avril 1946, lors de nos retrouvailles, mon ami et compagnon de misère Primo Levi, dans l'une de ses premières lettres. Que nous le voulions ou non, nous sommes des témoins et nous en portons le poids. Il y a 60 ans, du 1,1 million Juifs raflés dans toute l'Europe, nous étions quelques dizaines de milliers à avoir échappé à la chambre à gaz, au typhus, à l'épuisement, au coup mortel. Nous savions que le plus difficile nous attendait, le jour à la fois tant espéré et tant craint de la libération des camps. Le 18 janvier, nous entendons des canons russes toujours plus proches. nous ne partons pas au travail à la Bouna. Tous les camps de Haute-Silésie et Silésie doivent être évacués, à l'exception des malades et des infirmes, environ 6 à 7 000. Ils seront miraculeusement libérés le 27 janvier et parmi eux se trouvent Primo Levi et Charles Conrot, le camarade de Primo de cette époque, instituteur vosgien qui vit toujours. Il vient de fêter ses 92 ans. Quant à nous, considérés comme valides, nous pouvons encore être utiles au Troisième Reich, travailler en usine d'armement ou creuser des galeries souterraines pour le V1. Après le dernier appel à Monowitz, nous sommes lancés sur les routes, encadrés de capots et de SS, à peine vêtus de nos pauvres pyjamas de bagnards, chaussés de galoches en bois qui nous blessent les pieds. Il fait froid, très froid, moins 20 à moins 25 degrés. La neige est haute, un vent glacial souffle. Nous formons 5 par 5 une longue colonne de 60 000 cadavres ambulants avançant par à-coups, nous donnant le bras pour soutenir et pousser ceux qui n'en peuvent plus. Nous formons un petit groupe avec mon oncle René, déjà très faible, et je cite Bassiste, Lomnitz, Julti, Kosman, Ernest Lévy, les plus proches. D'un côté, mon oncle René, et de l'autre côté, Jacques Felbeau, professeur de mathématiques à l'Université de Strasbourg, à qui je dois beaucoup pour ma survie. Nous discutons des heures durant de topologie et du grand théorème de Fermat. Malheureusement, nous nous sommes perdus de vue le lendemain. Dans le silence ouaté de la nuit, claquent les coups de feu des SS qui achèvent d'une balle dans la nuque tous ceux qui ne peuvent suivre. Nul d'entre nous ne doit tomber vivant entre les mains des Soviétiques, encore moins comme témoin, aucun ne doit survivre. Il nous faut marcher un pas, un autre, encore un pas, encore. Qui peut imaginer par quel miracle de volonté nous avons pu résister? Les réserves de l'homme sont insondables, tant qu'un tout petit espoir de vie, si minime soit-il, existe. Nous arrivons à Nikolaï après 42 kilomètres de marche sans arrêt depuis Monowitz. Je dis bien 42 kilomètres. Les dernières heures ont été terribles. On nous a parqués à 3 à 4 000 dans un camp prévu pour 500. Le lendemain matin, nous avons trouvé devant les blocs des centaines de cadavres gelés de ceux qui n'avaient pu entrer. Nous sommes repartis et nous sommes mis en route pour Gleiwitz à 9h30 du soir, en tout 67 kilomètres depuis la veille. Le dimanche après-midi a lieu un tri par les SS, à la suite duquel Kosman, un ami, n'a plus été vu. On nous embarque, après 4 heures d'attente dans la neige, à 110 ou plus par wagon à charbon découvert, avec un quart de pain et une tranche de saucisson. Nous sommes un peu groupés. Le voyage a duré 7 jours et 7 nuits. Nous avons eu 12 cadavres dans notre wagon les derniers jours parce qu'il n'y avait plus de place. Les premiers wagons, les derniers ont été entassés contre la paroi. Et j'ai dormi si on peut dire, les 2 dernières nuits adossées contre eux. La plupart d'entre nous étaient aux 3/4 fous. La nuit surtout, c'était épouvantable. Nous avons été ravitaillés une seule fois. La deuxième, une demi-douzaine parmi nous se sont jetés sur les pains qu'on nous lançait et ont tout gardé pour eux. Nous ramassions à la cuillère la neige qui tombait sur les vêtements des voisins. C'était notre seule nourriture. Pour trouver une place dans ce wagon où nous gelions, sans autre protection que notre masse et la chaleur humaine, nous nous levions tous. À un signal donné, on s'accroupissait sur les talons. Malheur à celui qui manquait de réflexe et qui ne se baissait pas assez vite. Personne ne voulait lui céder le moindre centimètre. Je me rappelle encore un malheureux qui a été ballotté pendant de longues minutes au-dessus de notre tête, et pour cela, comme un ballon de football, et qui a laissé sa vie. Je ne suis pas fier de cet épisode, et pourtant, cela aussi était le cas. La lutte pour la vie pouvait devenir féroce, mais personne, je le pense, ne peut juger avec les critères moraux d'un homme libre. Enfin, vendredi 26 au soir, nous arrivons à Buchenwald, grelottant. On nous désinfecte, mais au lieu de recevoir la douche, nous avons dû attendre sous la neige, trempés jusqu'aux os. Nous nous couchons les uns sur les autres pour nous réchauffer. Nous sommes enfin poussés dans un bloc à plus de 1000. Nous devons passer la nuit par terre et ce n'est que le lendemain que l'on douche et nous habille. Une chemisette, une veste, un pantalon. Le 27 janvier, à 1000 mètres d'altitude. Tous les soirs, 2 heures d'appel en plein froid, sans caleçon, sans pull, sans manteau, sans chaussures. Nous étions dans un état de faiblesse incroyable. Mon oncle René est mort le 31 janvier. J'ai vu son cadavre nu transporté sur une brouette, puis entassé avec les nombreux autres, non loin du bloc. Devant chaque bloc, d'autres amas de cadavres. Croyez-moi, ce sont des images qu'on ne peut oublier. Je pense à cet instant à mes 6 millions de camarades juifs, tziganes, résistants, disparus dans les camps, et tout d'abord aux proches de ma famille déportés avec moi. Mon père, mon jeune frère Pierrot, âgé de 18 ans, que sa jeunesse et sa force ont désigné pour la terrible mine de Goléchaud, où il a survécu jusqu'au 19 janvier. À mes 3 oncles, personne n'est revenu. Mais je pense aussi aux survivants, comme ma mère, qui a vécu plus de 30 ans en revoyant chaque nuit dans ses cauchemars les flammes des crématoires de Birkenau et en entendant claquer les coups de feu qui achevaient les malheureux tardeurs de terre lors de notre longue marche de la mort. Je n'oublie pas tous ces camarades qui m'ont aidé à survivre. Jacques Felbourg, qui m'a initié à la topologie et dont les leçons de mathématiques m'ont permis d'oublier souvent la faim et la crainte de la mort, qu'il a rattrapé lui 3 semaines avant la libération à Ganaker, en Bavière. Raymond Baer, qui aurait pu être mon grand-père, PDG de Kuhlmann, et avec qui j'ai discuté de calcul intégral aussi pendant les trajets du camp à l'usine de Bounin, disparu brutalement en septembre 1944. Je ne puis les citer tous. Le professeur Weitz, le docteur Lévy, les jeunes amis hongrois Yuri Kaufmann et tant d'autres qui vivent dans ma mémoire et qui mériterait, faute de sépulture, un dernier hommage public. Mais deux êtres ont marqué ma survie au camp. Henri, le camarade des 3 derniers mois à Buchenwald et Ohrdruf, qui a remplacé mon oncle auprès de moi. Le 27 mars 1945, au Zeltlager, le jour anniversaire de sa fiancée et pour moi de mon départ de Drancy, il m'a offert un tout petit morceau de son petit morceau de pain, quasi transparent, tandis que je lui rendais une minuscule part de cette confiture que nous avions reçue par hasard ce jour-là. Jamais, aucun cadeau des êtres qui me sont les plus chers après ne pourrait surpasser ce geste. Il prouve que même dans les circonstances les plus horribles, l'homme peut rester un frère pour l'homme. Je voudrais terminer par l'évocation de celui qui fut pour moi, à Monowitz, l'image du courage tranquille, de la lutte pour rester un homme, de l'observateur lucide qui, sans doute parce qu'il désirait témoigner un jour, a emmagasiné dans sa mémoire prodigieuse tant d'événements, tant de portraits de camarades qui survivront grâce à lui. Et je veux parler de Primo Levi. Je voudrais, permettez-moi donc de conclure par le magnifique poème intitulé « Chemin » qui résume à lui seul le sens profond de ce jour. Vous qui vivez en toute quiétude, bien au chaud dans vos maisons, vous qui trouvez le soir en rentrant la table mise et des visages amis, considérez si c'est un homme que celui qui peine dans la boue, qui ne connaît pas de repos, qui se bat pour un quignon de pain, qui meurt pour un oui ou un non. Considérez si c'est une femme que celle qui a perdu son nom et ses cheveux, et jusqu'à la force tranquille, la force de se souvenir, les yeux vides et le sein froid comme une grenouille en hiver. Gravez, non, ne l'oubliez pas, n'oubliez pas que cela fut. Gravez ces mots dans votre cœur, pensez-y chez vous, dans la rue, en vous couchant, en vous levant. Répétez-les à vos enfants. Ou que votre maison s'écroule, que la maladie vous accable, que vos enfants se détournent de vous. Je vous remercie.
Monsieur Samuel, je vous remercie vivement et nous sommes très reconnaissants pour votre témoignage tellement touchant et tellement vivant avec une expérience que nous avons touché tout le monde partout. Et je vous demande maintenant de prendre une minute de silence pour méditation ou pour prière pour la victime de Auschwitz. Merci bien. I now invite the members of the Assembly to go to the forecourt for the unveiling of a memorial stone. Please, can you follow us?